have Anish Goel in the plane today, and Anish was President Obama's top advisor on South Asia policy.
Right.
And now you're working for Senator McCain on the Senate Armed Services Committee, where you're essentially in charge of science and technology as well as Asia policy. So we are going to fly over the Chesapeake Bay and talk about both your time in the White House and also what you're doing now and what you think of this situation with North Korea. How does that sound?
Sounds great. I'm looking forward to it.
All right.
We'll meet again. Don't know where. Don't know when.
And what is it like to go into the Oval Office and brief the President of the United States?
So it's nerve-wracking, the first couple times at least, and then you get used to it. I'll tell you a funny story about the first time I had to brief President Obama. He's only been president for like 3 weeks, and he's still got rock star status or aura around it. And I walk into the Oval Office with a colleague of mine, and there's Barack Obama sitting at the desk. The briefing was because the president was about to call the president of Pakistan. And we do the substantive part of the briefing, and that all goes fine. We tell him about Pakistan. He asks a few questions. He's read our little memo with all the background and everything. And then there's some dead time because there's a bit of a delay connecting the call to Pakistan. So the president starts chit-chatting with us. And my colleague and I were not prepared for this.
For chit-chat.
For chit-chat with the president
You
of the United
knew the
States,
policy
right?
inside and out, but you
That's right.
weren't prepared for chit-chat.
That's right. So we talk for a couple minutes, and then he says to us, "So, where are you boys from?" And I say, "Oh, sir, I'm from Iowa." I was really nervous. My first time briefing him. And I said the same thing I say to everybody when I tell them where I'm from. I said, "Oh, have you been, sir?" and he paused. He looked up at me, and he said, "Well, I did do a lot of campaigning there last year." And this is beautiful.
You know, flying over water, it's really important to fly with enough fuel so if you run out, you can make it to land the plane.
So how are we doing on fuel?
Well, that's why I asked you to check the left tank before we took off.
Oh, I was supposed to check the left tank?
Yeah, was it full?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, good.
Should I be concerned that this is blinking low fuel?
Well, if you didn't check the right tank, I think you might be.
I think we can still make it to land, because look, we can see it. Oh.
Well, you seem to have a lot of confidence for a guy who's never been in a small plane.
I've never been in a plane this small. I've been in a small plane before.
Now, the airport we were departing was just off of Andrews Air Force Base, which is where Air Force One is housed.
Right.
And I believe you actually accompanied President Obama to India for his first trip.
That's right. That was in November of 2010.
And I'm sure everyone asks you this, but what was it like to fly in Air Force One? And I want to know if it was more enjoyable than this flight.
No, definitely not, because this, the company is much better on this
well,
flight.
thank you,
Yeah.
because we still have 30 minutes to land, and so I still have a lot of power.
Okay, yes, I know, and we have plenty of fuel. I checked the fuel tank.
Did you check the fuel tank? Good.
When you get on, it's fun for like 30 minutes, and then you realize that you basically have to work the whole time.
Right.
And then what happened to me on that first flight is I'm sitting there sort of merrily going with the president, and all of a sudden my armrest rings. Oh, and so I'm like, okay, so I pick up the phone. And they said, "Oh, yes, is this Anish Goel?" And I said, "Yes, this is Anish." And they're like, "Yes, this is the Situation Room at the White House, on the ground in Washington, right? So-and-so is trying to reach you." And I was like, okay, patch him through. And so this woman gets on the phone, my colleague in the National Security Council at the time, and I say to her, "Wait a second, aren't you on the other plane right now?"
Because there were two planes.
The president flies with two planes everywhere. There's the Air Force One and there's the backup. In case there's a malfunction with one plane, they can still get the president wherever he needs to go. And she's like, "Have you been to the computer lab on board?" And I was like, "What?" And she's like, "There's a computer lab. Go find it. Review this document and get back to me." I'm like, "Okay." I'm like, "There's supposed to be a computer lab on board." And finally, I find one of the Air Force staff.
It's probably right next to the gym.
That's right.
Is there a gym on board?
No, there's not. Well, I don't know. I don't know what's in the president's part. In my part, there was no gym. So I walk into this room, And honest to God, it's like walking into an office, like in the White House. Like there's computer terminals, like you log in with your regular login ID, both classified and unclassified systems.
And so you logged on, you
logged
downloaded
in,
the paper she was talking
everything,
about.
right? The emails were there, and I had a ton of emails.
And now, did you also brief the president while you were on the plane?
Yes, I did. There's a conference room on the board, in the working section of the plane, and every flight that I took with him, about an hour before landing, they would schedule a briefing for the president so that he knew what to expect when they landed, what's going to happen, what are the first things on his agenda in country or wherever he was going.
Did you get to sleep at all? I mean, it's a 14-hour flight to India?
Yeah, I mean, you have to sleep some, right, because it's an overnight flight, but it's not restful sleep because you're wearing a suit the whole time. And any time at all, the president can come back and ask questions or want more information.
So you can't really change to your PJs?
No, yeah.
Because the president, you can't really change into your PJs.
No, there's no changing into PJs.
And that's because the president might come up to you.
That's right. And it's like being at work, right? You wouldn't change into your PJs at work, right?
But the president's not going to come up to you. I mean, he's got his office in the plane.
I'll tell you this, like what happened one time I was dozing on the way to India.
Wait, he actually came up to you?
So yeah, I was sleeping, right? And I hear some sort of a big booming voice next to me, and I sort of stir and I blink my eyes. I look up and I'm like, oh, good morning, Mr. President. So this is the Chesapeake Bay now?
Yeah, so this is the Chesapeake Bay on the right.
Okay.
Annapolis, Maryland is straight ahead where the Naval Academy is.
Okay.
Which is the officers' school for the Navy.
That's right.
And I thought it would be interesting to fly over the Naval Academy and talk about what some of our naval resources are doing in terms of preparing for a possibility of a missile launch by North Korea.
That's right. The Naval Academy, my boss went to the Naval Academy.
That's right. Mr. McCain was a graduate of Naval Academy. And so was my first boss when I joined the Senate, Senator Jim Webb.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And here, of course, is the Naval Academy right in Annapolis, Maryland.
Senator McCain actually, he's the son and grandson of admirals of the Navy, right? But he finished near the bottom of his class at the Naval Academy, yeah.
And is that something he likes to tell you guys?
He jokes about it a lot.
Does.
Yeah, he does. It really is a privilege to work for the guy, because this is a guy who has served his country for 60 years, right? Starting out in the Naval Academy, serving as a naval aviator, being a prisoner of war, and then even after he got released from being a prisoner of war, he came back and just almost immediately ran for Congress. And every time he comes to talk to us, it's always like, hey, he wants to know what we really recommend. He's like, forget about the politics. Tell us what is the right thing to do. Sometimes he has to play the politics, right, like any senator does. But I think his vote on health care earlier this year showed that he's willing to buck his party if he thinks that it's the right thing to do.
He's an extremely hard worker on the Senate Armed Services Committee, where essentially that's the committee that puts out a defense bill every single year. I mean,
that's right. It's the only authorizing legislation that has passed every year for the last 55 years. That gives us an immense amount of leverage. It makes the Department of Defense pay attention to us. It makes them be responsive, and it fosters a sort of active collaboration. And because we pass legislation every year, all sorts of other committees come to us and say, hey, can you put this in your bill? Right? We've been trying to pass this for 7 years and haven't been able to get it done. Can you stick it in your bill? And so it's almost become like an omnibus legislation now. So my portfolio is Asia policy and science and technology. And I'll tell you about the science and technology. I had no idea before I started how much research and development work the Department of Defense does. Over 50% of all federal science research dollars go through the Department of Defense.
Wow.
$72 billion budget every year.
$72 billion goes to research every year.
Yeah.
And what's the coolest research that the DoD is doing?
Well, some of it I can't talk about, but I have seen so many amazing virtual reality things, and I have seen so many amazing technologies designed to help the warfighter. Like I recently went to an F-35 squadron, and I don't know if you're aware, but the F-35 is sort of like the brand new spanking airplane.
The Joint Strike Fighter?
Yeah, exactly, the Joint Strike Fighter. And they cost $135 million a piece. before I saw it, I thought to myself, how could anything cost $135 million? But then you see it, and you see all the technology that's on it, and it is amazing. I'll tell you one technology that the pilot was describing for us. They have cameras on the bottom of the plane that basically then do a sort of virtual reality display into his helmet. So when he looks down, it's basically like he's looking through the bottom of the plane.
Wow, so he can actually turn his head and see what's happening below him, as if like there's glass underneath him.
Exactly. So we were talking about the Naval Academy, right, and how the Navy is putting a lot of resources, along with the Air Force, for contingency planning against whatever North Korea might send our way. And I recently actually went to Alaska to see all of our missile defense facilities.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
And these are the ground-based missiles.
Ground-based interceptors. Yeah.
But in addition, we also have to have interceptors that launch off of ships.
That's right, submarines mostly. Look, you know, the technology and the way everything is set up, like, it's amazing, right? Like, especially the radar detection capabilities, right? Like, if something comes off of the Korean Peninsula, they can detect it within seconds. Like, and then they have, you know, all this capability to determine its trajectory and where they think it's going to land, how fast it's going, you know, whether it's targeting a territory of the United States or mainland United States or anything like that.
One of the limitations I've heard is that, you know, if North Korea or an adversarial state fires lots of missiles, they will overwhelm our defense capabilities fairly quick, because there's a limit to how many interceptors we have and how accurate they are.
Exactly, and how many do you have to fire to take down one North Korean missile? And also, the technology is not yet proven, right? I'm not aware of any successful tests of a ground-based interceptor trying to take down a missile where we didn't know the launch point ahead of time, we didn't know the trajectory ahead of time, we didn't know, you know, all the, you know, the data about it ahead of time.
So that's right. So when we do these tests, we basically do them in optimal conditions.
That's right.
Even under those conditions, they're about 50% successful when the interceptor hits the incoming missile. Is that right?
That's right.
Now at this point, we're pretty close to the runway, to the point where even if we shut off the engine, we're gonna make it.
All right.
And that's something we actually practice during.
Oh, really?
Yeah, during practice sessions. So what do you say we shut off the engine and try to land?
Hey man, if you think we can do it, let's do it.
Oh, you're brave.
Yeah, I don't mind.
Smiling through, just like you always do, till the blue skies drive the dark clouds far